All right, so our topic is early detection of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. So you know who we all are, so I don't think we need to go through introductions.
The definition of autism. Autism spectrum disorder and autism are both general terms for a group of complex disorders of brain development. These disorders are characterized in varying degrees by difficulties in social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication, and repetitive behaviors. We got that from the Autism Speaks website. And with the May 2013 publication of the DSM-5 diagnostic manual, all autism disorders were merged into one umbrella diagnosis of ASD. I'll talk about the other types of autism in a second. So a little bit of history and background. The word autism actually comes from a Greek word, autos, which means self, and the term describes conditions in which a person is removed from social interaction. And Eugen Bleuler, I'm not pronouncing his name, he's a Swiss psychiatrist, was the first person to use the term. He started using it around 1911 to refer to one group of symptoms of schizophrenia. In the U.S., in the 1940s, researchers in the United States began to use the term autism to describe children with emotional or social problems. Autism and schizophrenia remained linked in many researchers' minds until the 1960s. It was only then that medical professionals began to have a separate understanding of autism in children. So then, treatments in the 60s and 70s, research into treatments for autism focused on medications such as LSD, electric shock, and behavioral change techniques. They kind of relied on pain and punishment. So then, as research progressed in the 80s and 90s, the role of behavioral therapy and the use of highly controlled learning environments emerged as the primary treatments for many forms of autism and related conditions. Currently, the cornerstones of autism therapy are behavioral therapy and language therapy. Other treatments are added as needed. So a little bit about the symptoms. One symptom common to all types of autism is an inability to easily communicate and interact with others. In fact, some people with autism are unable to communicate at all. Others may have difficulty interpreting body language or holding a conversation. Some other symptoms linked to autism may include unusual behaviors in any of these areas, interest in objects or specialized information, reaction to sensations, and physical coordination. These symptoms are usually seen early in development. Most children with severe autism are diagnosed by age 3. Some children with mild forms of autism, such as Asperger's syndrome, may not be diagnosed until later, and their problems with social interaction cause difficulties at school. Some of the causes, most researchers think autism runs in families. The underlying causes, however, are unknown. Most researchers agree that the causes are likely to be genetic, metabolic, or biochemical, and neurological. Others also believe that environmental factors may be involved. There are 4 main types of treatment: behavioral and communication therapy, medical and dietary therapy, occupational and physical therapy, and complementary therapy, which is music or art therapy, for example. And a little bit about the classification of the spectrum. Children with autistic disorder cannot use verbal or non-verbal communication to interact effectively with others. Usually, children with autistic disorder have severe delays in learning language. They may have obsessive interest in certain objects or information, and they may perform certain behaviors repeatedly. To be diagnosed with autistic disorder, symptoms must have been noted before the age 3. So the PDD NOS is pervasive developmental disorder, which is not otherwise specified. Children diagnosed with atypical autism are included in this group. Children with PDD NOS have symptoms that do not exactly fit those of autistic disorder or any other ASD. For example, the symptoms may have developed after the age of 3, or the symptoms may not be severe enough to be considered an autistic disorder. And Asperger's syndrome, children with Asperger's syndrome may display many of the same symptoms as children with autistic disorder. However, they usually have average or above average intelligence intelligence and initially show normal development of language. They often want to be social with others, but don't know how to go about it. They may not be able to understand others' emotions, and they may not read facial expressions or body language well. Their symptoms may not become apparent until school, when behavior and communication with peers becomes more important. Rett syndrome. Children with this severe rare condition begin with normal development from birth through about 5 months of age. However, from about 5 to 48 months of age, head circumference development slows. Children lose motor skills and social interaction and language development become impaired, and Rett syndrome affects girls exclusively. And the last one is childhood disintegrative disorder, which is like Rett syndrome. Children begin developing normally. However, from about age 2 to 10, children are increasingly less able to interact and communicate with others. At the same time, they develop repetitive movements and obsessive behaviors and interests. They lose motor skills, and this usually leads to them becoming disabled. This autism-like condition is the rarest and most severe in autism spectrum disorder. But like we said earlier, all these are under the umbrella of ASD now.
Okay, so just kind of like summarizing what Anthony said, you can see that autism has really changed and evolved along with mental illness and stuff like that. But autism itself is a cognitive disorder, and I think that's super important to understand, because some people think that these kids can help what they're doing and they cannot. So I think that's super important to understand. So now we're going to talk about root cause analysis, and this is just basically laying more groundwork for what we will go into later. So the different types of treatments and the different schools and stuff like that. So basically, I wanted to look at like the genetic side. Right now, it's really under debate what causes autism, but they really do see a link in genetics. So there's familial clustering, so it comes through your family line. There's whole genome sequencing. So basically, they found this novo mutations. Biology people, you can help me out. So it's basically just some of their chromosomes are a little mutated and stuff like that. And they're really studying these, and they did a study on, I think it was 28 people, and they saw a lot of overlap. So essentially, there is a big push for genetic genes being the reason for autism and stuff like that. So they also found links to epilepsy, social cognitive disorders, etc., which are extremely related to autism. A lot of children with autism have other things that coincide with their diagnostics. So some kids could have ADD, ADHD along with autism. So they found these 4 unrelated, 9 known, and 8 of the candidates were at risk for some of these different types of disorders and stuff like that. So now they're working on improving detection of autism spectrum disorder, and it's just we're moving in that direction, and hopefully we'll be able to see through genes, and just like with Down syndrome, be able to detect it while the baby is still in the womb. So, yeah.
So now I'm going to be talking about the areas of leverage and kind of focusing more on diagnosis and how early a child can actually be diagnosed with the autism spectrum disorder. So a reliable age of diagnosis is around 2 years old, but they can detect as early as 18 months old that a child has autism. But the average age for diagnosis is currently 5.7, so they're kind of focusing on why there is a gap right now in those ages. And the diagnosis is made based off of behavioral presentation and developmental history. So it's sometimes difficult to decipher in a child just typical child behaviors, and for a parent that doesn't really know what the symptoms are, they may not realize that their child is exhibiting these behaviors until they get older. So there is a push for earlier diagnosis, and the American Academy of Pediatrics that has instituted a recommendation for screening at the 9-month, 18-month, and 30-month visits, just regular wellness checkups with the children. And these are with a primary care doctor, and they may see a child exhibiting autistic behaviors, and later on I have a chart kind of what they go through and ask the type of questions to the parent. So there's the actual symptoms and indicators shown in a child with autism. They do not have joint attention, which is a spontaneous behavior that demonstrates an infant's enjoyment in sharing an object or event. They also experience poor eye contact, poor response to their name, lack of showing objects to others, and a lack of pointing to objects to communicate interest. So as I mentioned before, the reliable age for diagnosis is about 2 years old, but according to a study done in 2014, looking at a family videos of a child that already has been diagnosed with autism and going back and looking at their behaviors exhibited, 90% of the time the child at 12 months of age was exhibiting autistic behaviors, but the family just did not catch on to them. And then the increase in diagnosis has been because of a broadening of diagnosis and improvements to testing and going through different therapies and realizing earlier on that these children are exhibiting this. So the first kind of chart that I have is the questions that are early detection tools. The first is the MCHAT, which is the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers. So these are all questions that the doctor would ask the parent, kind of talk to them. Then they have the ESAT, which is the Early Screening for Autistic Traits, and the ITC, which is the Infant Toddler Checklist. And these are more for based off of a specialist. If you think that your child does have autism, that they would go in and look. And then this is the one just for preventative care visits and regular wellness checkups that a doctor, your primary care doctor, may see that the child is exhibiting these behaviors, and they go through and ask these questions.
Okay, so for the action plan and proposal, what we did was we took, like me and Gabby are each going to talk about different schools and like what their programs are that they do there, and then Lauren's going to talk about the Cleveland Clinic Center for Autism. So the school I'm going to talk about was the private high school that I went to when I used to live in Las Vegas, and their program is actually called the Mark 1014 program. And in this, the students are going to be exposed to general like education curriculums. They're going to be sitting in the classrooms. They're going to be like participating in discussions, labs. They're going to do like skits in class and just all the like just regular group activities. But while they're in the classroom setting, they're going to have a student mentor that's going to be with them, that's helping them like read the assignments, helping them just with any of their work, and also like keeping them on track. But then once like the classroom education gets like to the point where it's like beyond the student's reach, that's when they're going to go to the separate Mark 1014 classroom where they're going to be learning like tailored to their needs. So that's where like their intervention comes in, and they're going to be like working on reading, just basic math skills, and like writing. The students that are in this program are also taught like sign language and different hand motions to help communicate with their mentors and their teachers. But like when they're getting like flustered in class, it's like just a sign for them to like tell their mentor like they need to leave and they're uncomfortable. This program also really encourages the students to like participate in like extracurricular activities and to build like those relationships and like social skills with other students. So like at this school, they had kids that did football, basketball, wrestling, track. They were in band and choir. They participated in computer and art clubs. They did different talent shows and service projects, and they also participated in drama productions. And then there's actually one student now, he's a freshman at UNLV, and he's attending college. And they kind of made a program for him that kind of reflected the Mark 1014 program, so he could get like a college degree, which is cool to see like that this program was all like successful for him, because they can start in middle school. So he started 6th grade and then had this program until he was a senior in high school. So it really helped him out.
Okay, so my brother, he was actually adopted when he was 4 years old, so he does have autism. But the reason his parents gave him up was because they said that they don't have the time or the resources for him, which just kind of blows my mind because they live in Columbus, and there is like a specific school for kids with autism in Columbus. So actually, after I discussed kind of what's going on at the school I went to, my parents are actually going to have an IEP meeting soon, and they might be sending him back to Columbus just because he's not getting what he needs. So he is now in 8th grade, but he went to Zanesville Middle School, which is just kind of our general middle school. And so I talked to my parents just a little bit about like what his everyday I guess curriculum was like. So he had a one-on-one aide that would keep him on task in class. So he was in a regular classroom with an aide, and she would also kind of read the test to him. So he would have a test just like every other student, but she would sit there and read it to him. That way he would kind of, you know, be able to understand it, reword it, those kind of things. In Zanesville, he studied all subjects, so math, social studies, science, and English. It was a larger classroom with at least 15 students, so he, you know, that's kind of a large class, and, you know, with autism, he just kind of bounces off the wall sometimes. So this classroom was a little too challenging for him, though, because if you ever meet someone with autism, and they're all different, but even with an aide, reading him these questions and helping him reword things, it was just still too challenging for him. So at the last IEP meeting that my parents had, they asked them, because he's supposed to have homework modified towards him, so he's having the same homework as everybody else, but it's modified for John's specific needs. And they sent him home with a prompt that said, if you lived in the time of Martin Luther King, how would your life be affected by this? And for a kid with autism, he could not wrap his brain around that. Like, that makes no sense to him. He knows who Martin Luther King is, and he knows that kind of what he does, or well did, but he could not wrap his brain around that. So
Who modifies the assignments for him? His teacher,
His
or is
teacher.
there someone else?
Yeah. So so my parents at the next IEP meeting were like, look, this is too much. He cannot understand this. This is not benefiting him. So what they did to modify his homework is to give him no homework. So then he had no homework. So then, yeah, so this is interesting. It was kind of a closed classroom, but they would travel to different classrooms for the specific subjects. And he was supposed to have speech and occupational therapy at school because he is legally blind. So he would have like a typing thing, I guess, is occupational therapy. And so there was a really long story as to why we moved him to the high school I went to, but he just wasn't, his aide was kind of letting him do whatever he wanted. He was going to the bathroom by himself, which he is perfectly capable of doing, but long story short, that just was not a good idea. So they transferred him to West, and this is kind of more a closed classroom. There's only 6 students within the class, so this is better. But he doesn't have a one-on-one aide, but there's 3 aides and 1 teacher, so 4 people to 6 kids, which is, I think, a lot better. It's a contained classroom, so even the bathroom is in the classroom, but they go out for gym and choir. Now it's a little too easy for him, so they're giving him homework that John's strong suit is definitely math, so they give him the homework that says, this is quote unquote by my mom, 25, 26, 27, 29, what number is missing? He is in 8th grade. So I think that's kind of something a kindergartner could do. So like I said, it's a little too easy for him. But here they have a life skills curriculum, so it's heavily based on life skills. And they also do the subject as well. But so just some of the things that they did is they would, every Friday they'd go and sit in the cafeteria during the lunches and sell popcorn. And they have to be able to, you know, interact with people and like increase their social skills, get people correct change, measuring out the popcorn to put it in the little popcorn machine, things like that. They take them bowling, and they just take them out into the community so they can get exposure to other people. And he's supposed to be receiving occupational therapy for his vision, but like I said, my parents have an IEP meeting soon, so they're not really sure what exactly he's getting. So just kind of some problems within these 2 areas. The IEP meetings of what's supposed to be happening and what's really happening aren't the same thing. So they're having a lot of problems like with the homework. So modifying it to give him no homework is not benefiting him in any way. And then the therapy too, my mom hasn't really heard too much from him of doing anything outside of that. And I think another problem is with consistency, because I think with kids with autism, consistency is extremely important. And my brother is actually a senior, but our high schools are separate, but they ride the bus together. Well, they did. And this kid told my brother that John was running down the hallway, flapping his arms and screaming. And although that's just something John does, that's not acceptable at home, and that's not acceptable in public. But yet the teacher allows him to do that, so that when he comes home, like my parents are like, no, John, like that's not acceptable. So I think consistency is a big part in John's life, and it's just not happening, which is kind of unfortunate for him. And just a little extra assistance that he gets, so this is outside of school. My parents take him to physical therapy because he also has scoliosis, so yeah, they just work on upper body strength and stuff like that and tailor it to him, but that's just more for his back problems than his autism itself. So
So, going off what Gabby said, it's pretty apparent that autism has like a huge impact on family, like mentally, emotionally, physically, like everything, financially. So, not one solution is right for a kid, and that's like the hardest part. So, I worked at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Autism this summer, and I worked in the outreach program, and it was a summer camp. And I was in a 1-to-1, or there was a 1-to-2 ratio, so I had one kid that I was in charge of. And we use applied behavioral analysis, and that is a type of behavior therapy that Cleveland Clinic Center for Autism uses. They use it in the outreach program in the school for autism. So everything you are rewarding them for good things that they do, and you are, I don't want to say punishing, but telling them when they're doing something that is not expected, like expected behavior. So it was really interesting to see how much my child grew and like really progressed. He is basically independent. He's the smartest little boy I've ever met in my life. And it's just really cool to see that the consistency within this program is so awesome. And they try to relay with the outreach program. The people in charge, like my supervisor, goes into the classroom and observes my child. And she like relays what we did over the summer, and we worked on his IEP goals in the summer and stuff like that. So there really was like a continuation. But the continuation doesn't happen unless the families are involved too, and his family was super involved. So the program I was in, it was called Social Spies, and it was for very like high functioning kids. And it was really interesting to see because some kids, there were different like things for the kids. Like my child never had any aggressions, while another child would have at least 6 aggressions a day. And aggression is kicking, punching, screaming, throwing, any of that stuff. And you have to deal with it because that is how they respond, because their cognitive skills are not the same as ours. So you just have to understand that and work with it. But so those are the kids that are more like high functioning. The more lower functioning students actually go to the school for autism. So they go there instead of going to like a public school or something like that. So these kids could be nonverbal. Some of them are carrying around iPads. There's a few aides in the room, so they might have to restrain kids if they are putting themselves in danger or putting you in danger. So say they're like punching you, you put them in a restraint really fast. So it's really interesting to see. A lot of our kids this summer made a ton of improvement, and I hope that it's continuing on. I talked to my kiddo and his mom recently, and he is doing great, and he's still on track. So I really think this is a great like tool, just having all of the same population together. But they're all different at the same time, so I guess it isn't really the same population, but yeah.
Okay, so for the follow-up and assessment, what we did was we put together what we believe would be like the ideal like curriculum and like what they would need for like the most benefit for them. So first we said like we need to set standards for the child's needs. So that's gonna be like what they were both talking about with their IEP meetings. We just need to make sure like it's consistent between their home life and like their school life, and that they're getting the most benefit from it. Also we said the one-on-one aids, so that would all just be depending on like their class size. So like Gabby said, like in a bigger classroom, like obviously he's gonna need a one-on-one aid, but if there's only like 6 kids in the class, they could have like 1 teacher and 3 aides and be fine. And then we really said it's important for them to have those social skills. So they're encouraged to join the different clubs and teams, and then like do the selling of the popcorn and like handling money and stuff like that.
And then we think it's important for them to focus on life skills, but still have a balance of, your 4 typical subjects. But I think life skills is extremely important because those are more applicable for those kids than, if you lived in Martin Luther's time, like how would your life be affected? So I think that life skills are definitely important in learning how to function, and exposing them to the community is really important because of their social skills. Therapy, also occupational speech, physical, whatever the child needs. If that can be implemented in the school, that would be great, because just like, some parents aren't as involved, so not everyone can take their kid to physical therapy after school, so if that could be implemented during school hours, that'd be great. And then also consistency, so like I was talking about earlier, there's just a lot of different consistency within school behaviors and home behaviors, and home behaviors are trying to reflect how you should act in public, whereas school behaviors are just kind of, I don't know, a lot of people turn their heads sometimes and look, and I hate that, that really bothers me, so those behaviors that he's allowed to do at school are definitely behaviors that turn people's heads, and that really bothers me, so yeah, that was just kind of our follow-up and assessment.
I forgot to add something in about ABA. It's very personalized, so every child, they tend to have like fixations on things. So my kiddo loved Legos, so everything we did was based on Legos. So he was so excited to learn, so excited to get these prizes and stuff, and so excited to act as expectedly as possible. So it's just, once again, like doing everything for the child.
So is that reinforcing the obsessive behavior in a way? Because I know that's a divide in therapy, whether
Yes.
whether you allow that fixation and then reinforce it, or whether you kind of distract from the.
Right. Well, with him, it wasn't an obsessive necessarily. I guess it was more his interest. I shouldn't have said fixation, but yeah. So, but some kids would get obsessed with it. Like this one kid wanted a donut for every time that he didn't have an aggression, and his mom was like, "No more donuts. Like he's getting fat. Like he can't do this." So they had to change it, and that's fine. So.
Yeah, John's fixation is like numbers and time. So if you miss it, like 5 o'clock, like turn of the hour, he'll cry, and it's really not a big deal. But like, I missed 5 o'clock. And it's just like, I'm sorry, you'll see it tomorrow.
So kind of like our conclusion based off of everything that we did our research is, if you met a child with autism, you met one child with autism. Autism spectrum disorder is that, it's a spectrum disorder. Not every child has the same diagnosis, they don't exhibit the same symptoms, and they don't function the same way, and it's all based off of that, like they need specialized care, and tailoring it towards them is something that obviously we touched on in our follow-up assessment, so I think that that's very important.
So it kind of sounds like it's an inconclusive thing, but that's not at all what we're getting at. It's basically like, if you live in a school district that's awesome and like gives great IEPs and like resources, great, good for you. But there are also other things out there and more things to check out. And if something doesn't work, there's a lot of different things. And I know it kind of stinks that we can't just say this and this and this is what works every time, but it doesn't. So.
And we're excited.
Can we go back just to that? Am I reading it wrong? That one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was like, wait, is that part of the quote?
It is good.
Is it supposed to be like that?
Wait,
It's like one of those brain teaser things.
No, it's just
Like
an
extra.
Oh, no, there's an
Yeah.
extra one. I'm sorry.
It's funny. Your
No,
brain
I
reads
was
it
like,
correctly.
I was gonna ask it, like.
Sorry.
No, these are together the same. I'm like, oh, that's great.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, any questions?
I have a question.